Okay, you're good to go.
All righty. Well, welcome everyone to another conversation about the future of our democracy. That's a really hot topic everywhere these days. Here in this space, we see electoral reform and a more representative government as one of the best ways to fulfill our league mission and make democracy work for more voters. And that's why we have a new national position, aptly named Voter Representation and Election Systems. I am Paula Lee from the League of Women Voters, Sacramento, California, the capital city. And Barbara Klein is my co-host here from the Rogue Valley League in Ashland, Oregon. Our national position was adopted with 93% support. That's a record, I might add. And it supports alternatives to the current way we elect our representatives. And the goal of it is to enhance representation for voters and encourage participation, thereby hopefully, if not eliminating, really reducing apathy among voters. And this can be achieved, I'm convinced. Voters really can be more empowered, and our democracy really could work for more voters. But it can only happen if we really use our position that we just developed. And since institutional reform moves very, very slowly, and in parentheses, I'm getting older, we can't waste any time. So I think we need to get started looking at how the League of Women Voters can achieve the goals of our new national position at the federal level. So in the next hour, we're going to learn a little bit more from our guests about the fair representation. By the way, the federal legislation that I'm talking about was introduced in the last Congress by Representative Don Beyer from Virginia as HR 4000. And it will be soon introduced again in this Congress. And then it'll have a bill number. And then we can start really talking. So we put the link to HR 4000 in the chat for you.
I didn't yet, but I will.
Okay. But Barbara will put it in there. And before we get started with our guests, we have a very, very quick poll with a simple question.
Okay, can you all see it?
Are you familiar with the Fair Representation Act?
And it's anonymous. Okay, people seem to almost still be voting, so give it just a second and then I'll end. Okay, I think that's it. I'm going to end it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Interesting. Can you all see it now? The results?
I can.
50%. I assume if you can, everybody can. Okay, so there's the answer. 50% of you were familiar with it, so that's pretty impressive, actually. Okay, should I take this down?
I closed it on my end. Okay. So now we all know that Congress is hardly a miniature portrait of the people in this country. And failing to elect enough women is just one of the missing ingredients in a healthy democracy. We also know that remedies over the past 100 years for this are not working. Having the vote is not enough. Recruiting women is not enough. Training them and funding them is not enough to get past this 25% or so that we seem to remain at in our legislative bodies. So tonight or this afternoon, we really welcomed and appreciate 2 women committed to reducing the institutional barriers that must be faced and overcome in a very intentional way. That is Cynthia Terrell and Michelle Whitaker from Represent Women. Cynthia Terrell is the founder and executive director of Represent Women and a very outspoken advocate for all the rules and reforms that are needed to advance women's representation and women's leadership. She has been published in too many print journals to mention. Oh my goodness. Has appeared on C-SPAN's Washington Journal and has participated in numerous radio shows and panel discussions on topics, guess what, of electoral reform and structural strategies to elect more women. She's also an avid knitter and gardener. She has 3 children and she's active in the Quaker community. And if you go to Represent Women, do sign up for her newsletter weekly blog that she does. It's just fabulous. And she covers women's representation on an international level. Michelle Whitaker is a Represent Women board member, and she's a communications strategist, and she has a focus on building a better world. And so therefore, Michelle wears many hats. She has over 15 years experience in the profit and nonprofit world. Her expertise is in strategic messaging, campaigns, online engagement, and media outreach. So I know she's probably sought after by candidates all the time, but I would guess that, Michelle, you're also using these strategies and messaging skills to help electoral reform advocates. Because I just heard Michelle speak about communication strategies for testifying in legislative state committee hearings. I heard her last week and it was very helpful. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you both for being here. So for our participants, be sure if you have a question to put a big Q in front of your question so we can grab it without delay. We will end at 5 p.m. unless we have an overwhelming number of questions, and then we'll go to 5:15. Now, Cynthia Terrell and Michelle Whitaker.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. It's been a real, I would say joy. I don't really like that word. Quakers often use that word and it always irks me a little bit, but I have to say it's been a true joy knowing Barbara and Paula really for many years. It's been a long time that we've been having conversations about the Electoral College and fair representation voting and ranked choice voting and democracy and women's representation. So it's fun to be continuing that conversation and also fun to be continuing a relationship with the League of Women Voters, which my mother was very active in upstate New York in the 1960s. And I feel like my whole early childhood was framed by whatever the League of Women Voters was talking about, which was mostly China. At that point, it seemed like you were talking about China for a decade, was what we talked about at home. So anyway, great to be here and really looking forward to a good conversation. I have a presentation, a slideshow that I'll walk you through tonight that I hope will provide an introduction to the Fair Representation Act for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, and hope it will answer some of the questions you may have. Michelle is going to talk a little bit about her experience with campaigns and what the impact of ranked choice voting, the Fair Representation Act will be. And then a little bit also about her work in Maryland, which I'm also part of, to figure out how to leverage coalitions with people, members of the League and others to get this work done at the local level. And then hope we can have a good conversation. So I'm going to, this is always that awkward time when I'm going to share my screen, and then it's going to be a little messy for a minute. And then I'm going to minimize all of you. And I am going to present my screen. Can everybody see the screen okay now?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent, great. So the Fair Representation Act, improving descriptive representation in the United States. So despite really record-breaking elections for women and people of color in 2018 and 2020 election cycles, women remain underrepresented, as do people of color and lower income people and young people, really at every level of government. Women make up approximately 51% of the population, but 24% of the Senate, 27% of the House of Representatives, 16% of governors, and 31% of state legislators. And you may have heard the data and the statistics about how women rank among countries internationally around the globe. And it's good to have a little context on this number. Currently, we rank 67th. We're tied with Mali. But 20 years ago, the United States ranked 46th in terms of women's representation. So just to say that again, so that it really sinks in the year 2000, the United States ranked 46th. Now we rank 67th. We're tied with Mali. Other countries that have about 27% of women in the US House of Representatives include Vietnam, Bulgaria, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, and Iraq. So that gives you a sense of, while it may seem like we've made good strides in the United States, and we have, we're certainly very far behind really all of our allies in terms of women's representation, and certainly behind really nearly every country that's considered to be a robust democracy. So my organization, Represent Women, was founded to really focus on what is it that's making a difference to elect more women to office around the world and to jurisdictions in the United States. There's a lot of work now, as I'm sure you all know well, on preparing and training individual women to run for office, as Paula mentioned, and that work is important. But the fact is that the countries that rank above the United States don't have better trained women, nor do they have better men, for that matter. I always hope that will get a laugh. It never has. I use that line all the time, though. They don't have better women, they don't have better men, but they do have better systems. And so my organization is all about figuring out what those best practices are and figuring out how to adopt those best practices for use in the United States. So the Fair Representation Act is really an adaptation of a proportional representation system that will ensure that voters have more of a chance to impact outcomes of elections, which I would say just in its raw form is what a healthy democracy is all about. We want voters to have power to elect candidates of choice. So there are three main components of the Fair Representation Act. The first is ranked choice voting, which I suspect many of you are familiar with, but it's ranked choice voting in multi-winner districts. In about half the states, there would be a need for having multiple districts to represent all the constituents. And in each of those districts, ranked choice voting would be used to elect the members of Congress. And those districts in the states that have enough members would be would be drawn by independent redistricting commissions. So those three things combined, the data tells us, would lead to more partisan fairness, reduce some of the skews that we see between rural and urban areas in terms of partisan representation. It would lead to less political polarization. As a result of that, we'd see more diversity in terms of ideology reflected in Congress. And then it would also increase racial and gender diversity in Congress. I'll also say that because the lines no longer determine who gets elected in the districts, gerrymandering really is effectively dead because there's no point in somebody trying to draw the line to produce one single winner, because there will be no more single winners. So it's a very, I think, effective way to end the practice of gerrymandering. So ranked choice voting, again, I suspect many of you are familiar with it. It's an electoral system in which candidates rank their preferred candidates in order, and it allows people to vote for their favorite, their second favorite, have a backup, et cetera, et cetera. There are 21 jurisdictions that use ranked choice voting now. It's used in the state of Maine. It will be used in the state of Alaska. Military and overseas voters use it in 6 states. Georgia has just voted to add a group of 5 who do that already. It was used in Democratic Party primaries in the 2020 election cycle. And a number of state parties, both Democratic and Republican, will be using it for various internal election processes. The Virginia party, for example, is using it to nominate candidates for statewide executive office, and it'll be used in a lot of other settings as well. Robert's Rules of Order recommends ranked choice voting. It's used at the Oscars and used internationally as well. We can talk more about that if anybody has questions. So the real task of Represent Women is to do research, as I say, on these best practices. We track data on representation outcomes in jurisdictions with ranked choice voting. And we found that men and women hold about equal numbers of seats on city councils in jurisdictions with ranked choice voting, and about equal numbers of mayoral positions as well in jurisdictions with ranked choice voting. And in both, in all jurisdictions with ranked choice voting, we see an increase in the representation of people of color as well. So turning now to multi-winner districts, there's a long history of using multi-winner districts in the United States. At-large districts are still used in many cities. There are 10 states now that use multi-winner districts to elect state legislators. There are 3 of those 10 states actually use more than districts with more than 3 people. States like New Hampshire, which does very well in terms of women's representation, has districts that are as large as 11. Currently, those districts, of course, are elected with a winner-take-all system, and we would advocate for them, of course, to be elected with a ranked choice voting system to make sure that constituencies of color can elect candidates of choice and that voter power is maximized. You can see here, this chart shows that the states that do have multi-seat districts on average tend to elect more women than the states without multi-seat districts. West Virginia there, while it looks low, the percentage of women that are elected to the multi-seat districts in West Virginia is about 26 or 27%, while only the single member districts in West Virginia only have about 10% women. So we see it even, the impact even in states that aren't doing terribly well overall. I always love to have this slide in the presentation because Jeanette Rankin of herself was elected from a multi-seat district in Montana. She was a Republican, of course, and the Democrats quickly figured out that the multi-seat districts there gave Republicans more power to elect candidates of choice. So they switched to single member districts in the next year after she was elected, essentially gerrymandering the first woman elected to Congress out of her seat. I'll note, by the way, April 2nd was the anniversary of the day she was finally allowed to sit in Congress. Her fellow lawmakers stewed over whether to actually let her enter the chamber, even though she had been duly elected. Anyway, that's my Jeanette Rankin story. So when you combine ranked choice voting and multi-member districts, the threshold is different for winning, and it's a very neat formula used in Cambridge, Massachusetts, used in a number of other jurisdictions in the United States and around the world. Happy to talk about that more, but I'll pass over that because I realize I'm taking a lot of time here with my commentary. And then the third component that I mentioned are independent redistricting commissions, which are sort of the gold standard now. We don't want partisans and state legislators who are going to benefit from the lines to have anything to do with drawing the lines. And so, of course, independent redistricting commissions are central to making sure there's as much fairness and transparency as possible. So just to sum up, fair representation in voting helps level the playing field and elect more women candidates, particularly because parties have more incentives to recruit more women to run for office when there are multi-seat districts and slates of candidates running. There are more voter options. Voters have more power to elect candidates of choice without spoilers. Elections are more competitive, meaning that there'll be a greater chance for candidates to win in open seat races and as challengers. Excuse me, there's generally more civility in the campaign process, which we know from anecdotal data encourages more women and people of color and quote unquote newcomers to the political process to be more likely to run for office. And then it can lower the cost of campaigns as well, because of the changes in the dynamic of running for election, the grassroots focus, the lack of negative campaigning. And within a multi-district, you need to really turn out your constituency and in a grassroots way, appeal to your opponent's constituents for support, but it's a much less money intensive process that doesn't really, there's no incentive to do negative campaigning in that kind of an election. So costs are lowered. Oh, so we have this video. Paula, shall I take the time to show it? I think it's pretty short. Does that seem good now?
Definitely.
Okay, here's a video. We have a great communications fellow who has done a video on each of our major areas of work, reform so more women run, win, serve, and lead. And this is the video she did on women winning. Hope it will be easy to see.
Women are winners. Whether it's topping the charts, breaking records, healing our sick, or making the world safer, women are leaders and more than capable of getting the job done. As the United States celebrates another quote-unquote record-breaking year for women's representation in politics, global rankings show little progress has actually been made. The U.S. continues to be outpaced by most of our democratic allies that don't have better women running, but better systems for women to run and win in. Yes, women can win elections, but they face more barriers doing so. And that's a big problem. Our winner-take-all electoral system fortifies the political status quo, creating barriers for newcomers who are more likely to be women, younger, and more diverse. Barriers like high-cost elections, derisive and negative campaigning, incumbency advantage, and gatekeeping by party leaders. You know, the things that generally set us all on edge when it comes to U.S. politics. However, there are data-backed solutions and reforms ready to combat this representation crisis. Through extensive research,
Whoops. Sorry about that.
Women data-backed solutions and reforms ready to combat this representation crisis. Through extensive research, Represent Women points to multi-winner ranked choice elections. With multi-winner districts, a legislative district represented by more than one representative, and ranked choice voting, a system that allows voters to rank candidates in order of preference, this innovative marriage of two reforms is commonly referred to as fair representation voting, and corrects the barriers present in our current winner-take-all system. With benefits such as cutting the cost of elections, incentivizing positive, issue-based campaigns, inspiring healthy competition, increasing voter options, and encouraging political parties to recruit more women and people of color to run and win. Our research is clear. If we level the playing field for women to win elections, our nation's idea of a leader will become that of a strong, pioneering, innovative, and qualified woman leader.
I'm sure you'll want to race to our website to look at the other videos in that series.
Yes, they're excellent. That's so good.
Good. So the Fair Representation Act has been introduced in the last 2 Congresses. It's been endorsed by the New York Times. Multiple other publications have endorsed it. Women leaders like Jessica Bird from 3 Point Strategies and Ellie Smeal from the Feminist Majority, along with a lot of other people, support it and are talking about it. We think that's super exciting. So what can you do? You can organize a local league meeting on the Fair FRA, and I'm sure Paula and Barbara can help direct you on that. You can contact your representative, or please do, if you support it, and ask them to sign on to HR 4000. And then, of course, if you're an avid social media person, show your support online by retweeting stuff from our posts from our website, and finding other groups that are for the Fair Representation Act and help amplify the message. And I will just say, to be completely honest, there's no way that we will achieve gender parity in our lifetimes in government without structural reforms. There just isn't any way. There have only been a handful of countries that have done it. Most of them are authoritarian regimes where they can install women, which is a good thing, but it's not through the democratic process. Really, all of the countries that rank above the United States, nearly all, use some form of a proportional system or some different system than a winner-take-all system. And so if we really are serious about electing a Congress that's a portrait of the people in miniature, we have to do the Fair Representation Act. So I'll leave you with those strong words of endorsement.
Cindy, I know that we're going to have questions at the end, but Paula, I don't know if you noticed, there was an important question that I don't think is part of Michelle's section, and I thought it might be good to answer now.
Is this on the impact to the For the People Act?
Yes, if there's conflicts with, are you going to talk about that?
Yeah, I actually can answer that right now. Cynthia, is that okay if I'll take that?
Sure.
Okay, so hi everyone, Michelle Whitaker, she, her pronouns, coming to you from my car in Kensington, Maryland, but will hopefully soon be at my desk as soon as I can. But the question that was asked in terms of, is there a conflict with the For the People Act? And the answer is no, because actually the For the People Act includes a provision in there that helps states receive funding to update their systems. There's also, I believe there's still a provision in there that talks about allowing funding for studies to happen on ranked choice voting. So these are very compatible. And Fair Vote, which is a national organization that Cynthia helped to found, has said that the For the People Act really helps to pave the way for the Fair Representation Act to go into place. And so that's what's really exciting about the opportunity there. I'll transition and just talk a little bit about what the impact is for candidates and what we can do, and campaigns, and what we can do for in our individual context. My background, as was said earlier, is in communications and political strategy, and that's I've had the opportunity to work on political campaigns. I've had the opportunity to also help advance ranked choice voting in Maryland, and I want to give a shout out to the League of Women Voters in Maryland, the League of Women Voters of Montgomery County, where I am, for their work and support of what we've been doing, and helping to galvanize their members to reach out to elected leaders as we've been championing different legislation through the state. When it comes to election reform, we know that it's a big change, but it's one that we know has to happen in order for many communities to have the opportunity to have their voices heard. My mom is a native Washingtonian, born and raised in Washington, D.C. And she never knew, or she's never known representation as a DC resident. She now lives in Maryland, close to me, but she's never known like having full representation in Congress. These are the sort of things where it's taken, a number of years. I won't give away her age, but it's taken a number of years for us to get to a point where Congress is seriously considering making DC the 51st state. We know like change sometimes is incremental, but we can't let the delays of those who are in power control the justice that we need to see in the world. The same can be said when we look at the civil rights movement and how long it's taken to make sure that we were actually codifying the rights of African Americans and all people of color to be free from discrimination and to have the same rights to participate fully in democracy. That's taken a long, long time. And we see that again, even when we look at the women's right to vote, and how 100 years just to get to the point of establishing that, we're still struggling to kind of make the strides that we know are possible in our country. When it comes to campaigns, it's transformative to use tools like ranked choice voting. We can look at elections, whether we look at Maine, Tacoma Park, Maryland uses it, other cities that are using it. We see the difference in who's being elected and who's able to run and who's elected right away. There's transformation happening because we see more women seeing the opportunity to run. We see more people of color seeing the opportunity to run. And most particular, we see that them shifting the way that they actually engage in the campaigns with voters and with other candidates. A great example is in Maine, two candidates who were very similar often would use language that was complimentary of each other, to say, like, if you like this candidate, that could be your first choice, make me your second choice, for the election. We saw this happen in other areas where it's not that negative campaigning, and it's really people who are engaged in having a real discussion and helping voters make an informed decision about what they want, who they want to represent them in that particular legislative body. But we also see that for voters, there's a real impact in terms of the difference that you experience in the voting process. In Montgomery County, we've had elections where we've had 33 candidates run. I know there's I think Barb, I've heard someone from Minnesota, she's experienced the same thing where we've had candidates in run, 33 candidates run for different positions. And, it's overwhelming. And yes, maybe you have a candidate that you like, but you also know, like, you're making these choices in your head about, like, well, if I vote for them, do they have a chance to win? Should I vote for this other person if I want to try and see that person win? These two candidates are very like-minded, and I want to make sure that we're lifting up these issues, but there's not a way to do that and reflect that on my ballot. That's one of the transformative pieces about ranked choice voting, is because you actually have the ability to express your vote fully, to express your opinion more fully in that election, to say, like, here are the candidates that really align with my values, with what I want to see in government. And, we've seen in exit polls, not only in New York, which is using it right now for their primaries, and their special election primaries, and then also the June primaries, but in other places where there's been exit polling, that voters understand it. It's intuitive. It's intuitive, just like when you go to your coffee shop or your favorite, corner store or whatever, and you're trying to make choices about your favorite beverage or dessert that you want. And you know that if the first one option isn't there, you know that you have a backup option that you're looking at and a couple other options as well. It's the same thing. People get it, people understand it, and people like that they have that choice. And those are the sort of things that we really want to make sure continues to happen and are part of the process. And my time when I was formerly a Fair Vote staffer was really about helping with our communications pieces, really doing the research to understand the voter experience and talk about how we talk about reforms in ways that connect with people. And a couple things I just want to share is that election reforms often become a place of wonky talk. And, someone who lives just outside of DC and, Washington politics, there's a lot that goes on that people like to talk wonky and talk about, the specific details of policy. And that's important discussion. But when you're trying to engage voters or supporters to get them behind a bill, to get them behind a reform, you need to really connect on almost like a heart level about that, rather than just that head level of, like, why does this make a difference in my life? And that's a lot of the work that I was doing at Fair Vote, and that I continue to do as a statewide coordinator for ranked choice voting in Maryland, is really connecting to, like, what's that experience been like for you in the past? What do we want to change in terms of your experience at the ballot booth, but also the experiences that we're having with who's being elected and are they actually representing our voice? Again, going back to Montgomery County and looking at our current county council, from the 2018 election where we elected the most recent county council, we only have one woman on the council of out of 9 members. And so we're seeing that the lack of representation in terms of women having a voice on issues like what's going on with education. How are we addressing domestic violence issues? How are we addressing the climate? What all of these core issues to our communities? And that's the sort of thing where you need to make those connections so that they're not just thinking it's this, it's not connected that how we vote is impacting who is actually getting elected, because it is totally related. And it needs to be something that's centered around us as much as we're focusing on advancing an issue, whether it's climate justice, education reform, whatever it is. And so that's one reason why my work in Maryland and also national work that I've done has been about building coalitions. And you can do a lot of great initial work, bringing together all of those civic groups that are already engaged in election reform, whether it's the League of Women Voters, Common Cause, all of those folks who are already involved in that level. But you also need to think beyond that of the other circles of individuals who can really be change makers in how we're talking about this language to reach new communities. And some of my colleagues who are working on ranked choice voting in DC have been doing this in really creative ways, engaging with groups that are focused on Black and Brown communities, immigrant communities. We're doing the same thing here in Maryland. And what you see is that once you have those initial conversations and then you see how they're talking about it in their own communities, there's maybe some like light bulb moments that happen that change the way that we're actually framing this messaging overall to help make sure that we're bringing in more people. And so I'll just leave that comment. That's the last piece, because I know we may be getting close to time, but it's those kind of moments of building the coalition and creating the systems for change that really make a difference. So I'm happy to help take questions now.
Thanks, Michelle. I think you have somebody knocking at your window.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. One question was about the language of our national position. And so I just put into the chat where you can find that language in the impact on issues, which is our national publication. The language is all there. I had a couple of questions for either one of you. Should we, well, I guess it was you, Cindy, that mentioned that on your action page, you mentioned that we should take some action now, but one of the questions was, should we wait until we have a new bill number? When I know there's a lot going on in Congress, so it's probably stalled the introduction of the bill, but should we wait?
Yeah, based on other legislation that is carried over from the 116th Congress, they all seem to have the same bill numbers. So I think it's a safe bet that it might be 4,000 again. I mean, HR1 was HR1, that I think they, but you could definitely, I'm not 100% on that, but I believe that's the case. But I think Don Beyer is intending to introduce it in the coming weeks. There's been a lot of, as you say, a lot going on in Congress. But it would be great for people to contact their individual members to start a dialogue with members, so they're starting to hear about it, particularly women members, members of color. It's been something that mostly has been sponsored by men in Congress. So we're trying to change that. And it would be fabulous to make some of those connections before it's introduced to increase the chances that there'll be more lead sponsors when it first gets introduced.
Oh, that would be great.
And I would just add that because the For the People Act includes ranked choice voting, there is a natural connection that you can make and have and just begin a conversation with your representative to just say, like, do you have questions about ranked choice voting? Here's the position that the league has taken. Here's why this reform is important. And not only for the People Act, but we know that the Fair Representation Act will be introduced, and that includes ranked choice voting as well. And why there's make the connection about the benefits. So it's if you talk to a legislative staff person and you're just giving them that information, it can be very useful. And I think that's also very helpful even in this stage, even just with the For the People Act, because there is a temptation because of everything that's included in the For the People Act, that some people might be like, okay, well, we're going to take some things out so that we can help get this passed. And if no one is championing or talking about why ranked choice voting is important, then it could be on the chopping block in terms of being removed. And so it's a good reminder just to make sure that you're in front of people and hearing about it, so that they're not going to be dismissive and think that they can write that off.
Okay, I should mention,
Paula, as a heads up, I'm just going to stop highlighting everybody, spotlighting, so that we can see more people and have a conversation, if that's okay with everybody. If I can figure out how.
I just think I should mention though, regarding league advocacy, when we talk about legislation at the federal level, we really can't identify with the league until the league has taken a position on that particular legislation. So for now, our goal in talking about the fair representation is to lead to the national organization taking a strong position on this, so that we can get our co-sponsors and talk to our representatives. But for now, we have to talk to, if you are talking to legislative staff or legislators, we need to speak as an individual about this legislation. That's what the national office would say. But I have a question for you all later about how we might move to advocating for this with our national board.
I see there's a hand up, but there was also a question I don't want missed, and we'll get to you, Mike. But there was question, and I don't know if it was yours or not, but I do want somebody to respond to it, because yes, it was. It's about the fact that redistricting is only supposed to be done once a decade. So Cindy or Michelle, would you like to speak to that?
I actually don't know.
What was the full question? Oh, sorry.
Why don't you let Mike speak to it?
He's unmuted.
Mike.
Okay, my question.
Mm-hmm.
So HR1 says that redistricting can only happen once in the 2020s. And if we want Fair Representation Act to come in play before 2032, it will require another redistricting. Does that mean that Fair Representation Act would amend HR1 and provide for a new redistricting option, possibly in the late 2020s?
Thank you.
I don't have the full answer on that one, but that is a very good question. I think it would require a new redistricting at that moment, and that's not. I wouldn't say that that's like a deal breaker in things happening, because for instance, in Montgomery County, I like to use my county as an example. We just passed a new configuration for our districts, and so we are doing that on top of doing our census and other pieces. And so if you make a change, then that change is incorporated, so that takes precedent, I believe. But I'm not a legal advisor on that piece, so we could definitely get a legal opinion if that's necessary. But I believe it wouldn't necessarily be a conflict. It just means that they're setting that standard then, and then you're making an amendment to say, if we enact the Fair Representation Act, then we're allowing for that change to happen so that you can have the multi-member districts.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, just on that note, that I think, and I'll try not to sound too partisan, Paula and Barbara, but I think the reality is there are very narrow windows of time to get work like this done because of the likelihood of a different kind of a Congress by 2022 and beyond. So it may feel like, oh, we need to do some education and then we'll build and we'll do this and that. But, you know, if we want change to happen, it has to happen in the next 18 months, pretty much on everything. Actually, it probably has to happen in the next, you know, a period of time, which makes it implausible that it's going to happen. But I do want to just emphasize that where these kinds of reforms are both long overdue, they're hard to make happen, and there are very few political, you know, the stars have to align just so that something like this would pass. And they're not quite aligned right now, but what we really need to do right now is ensure that all the pieces are in place the next time the stars align. Let's put it that way, trying to sound as all partisan as I can. And I think that we don't want to leave it till the next time there's an opportunity to push reform like this. Constellation, yes, much better word. Thank you.
So we might have to move a little faster with our national organization.
Why, yes, perhaps so.
Yes. I think our organization has been in a transformative mode at the national level, and I think they're stepping out a little bit. An example is they have spoken out on filibuster reform, and that's unusual without a 4-year study. So I think there's hope there. One other question, unless I'm missing some in the chat, Barbara, I had one come up earlier that was about the cost. If you could speak a little bit, expand on that thought you had about the cost of multi-member or multi-winner elections when you're trying to reach voters in a larger area. You talked about how there's more of a grassroots effort to reach your constituency. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Sure.
People are worried about money in politics in the lead.
Yes. Well, I'll say something and then I'm sure Michelle will say even more. For people who are particularly worried about money in politics, most of the money that's raised by candidates is to run negative campaigns. That's what costs money. They spend money on, trumping up, shall we say, objections to their opponent. But if you have a system like ranked choice voting, where the incentive is for you to, if Michelle and I are running, I want to do everything I can to attract Michelle's supporters to vote for me second or third, or Mike's supporters to vote for me fourth. So not only is grassroots campaigning rewarded, which costs a lot less money, but there's actually a disincentive to commit that kind of negative campaigning that costs the most money. So in both those ways, it's a cost savings. In terms of running, it really varies by the given that all the states are different, it's going to be a different story, a different narrative to some extent in every state. But in general, think of having to motivate your base, and you turn them out through social media, through connections, church affiliations, union affiliations, professional affiliations, all those things that you would normally do in a campaign. But then you're also finding common ground with like-minded candidates, and you do that again in the realm of public opinion, public debates, et cetera, et cetera. So we haven't seen it happen yet. So this is conjecture based on other contexts in which it's been used, but I think it would be a significant cost savings and a change from the way campaigns are traditionally run.
Cindy, or Michelle, would candidates team up and share campaign expenses?
It's a possibility, but you also have to look at the other campaign specific state laws campaign finance laws that might impact that. And the other thing that we should name, and Cynthia talked about this before, just when talking about both the combination of what's included in the ranked choice in the Fair Representation Act, is that it's a combination of redistricting reform, ranked choice voting, and the multi-member districts. We know that there's not a single reform that, you know, makes all of our democracy work better. We have to combine these reforms that we know really work well. You know, at redistricting commissions, we know that they've made a difference in taking the power out of these politicians to draw their own districts and really putting it into the hands of people. We also know ranked choice voting increases the voice of voters in terms of expressing themselves. And then while this isn't part of the Fair Representation Act, it's important to look even at public financing. And I believe Congressman John Sarbanes has been introducing a fair elections bill in Congress. And that combination is also something that can help increase participation and defray some of those expenses that we've had with our elections, to make it more viable for candidates who don't come from those easy accesses to wealth, to be able to run a competitive campaign. You can see that where public financing is currently being used. It's really great. It's exciting because, one example with New York has public financing and they're using ranked choice voting. I really want to see how this all comes together. There's going to be studies that come later with this, but those are the sort of things where when you bring all of these reforms together, that's where you really make that change. So we can't just think like, okay, it's just about passing this. We need to be thinking how these connect to one another to making that change happen. And that's where yes, there's different ways that you can make this work so that it costs less, you know, in the way that you're running a campaign, because it's different, either the way, you know, how you're doing your campaigning overall, how you might be teaming up with another candidate, if that's possible. All those things can be changed, can really help change the game for who's running and who's winning.
Paula, I
Yes.
just wanted to add something while we're still talking about Fair Representation Act. I mean, we're a league group here, and I appreciated your comment about the league transitioning to working a little faster, which I think is very true. I just wanted to remind everybody a couple things, that we don't have the bill yet this session. And while that's still the case, I don't think our national organization has the bandwidth to consider the bill, and they need to support it, as you said, and I just want to repeat that they need to support it before we can be talking to our Congress people about it. So one little thought might be, and I know you might want to go there, is that we need to stay on top of it if it does get introduced, that maybe some of us act together with our leagues to ask for permission to use our new position to work on that bill if they support it, or ask them to consider supporting it.
Exactly. That's one of the final comments I had as we wrap up here. Let me ask first, though, are there any other questions that do you see any hands raised, Barbara? Are there any other final comments or questions before we end? And I wanted to mention while you're looking there, that, as Barbara said, it has not been reintroduced, so we can't really do anything with national yet. However, if you are interested, anyone on this call is interested in joining a discussion on this process or a strategy that we are developing to seek approval from national.
Cindy Black,
please,
sorry, go ahead.
Cindy, okay, but I just wanted to mention before we end, so you have time to put your name in. If you're interested in joining in on a discussion where we're going to strategize about how to seek approval from national to contact our representatives, please put your name and league and contact information in the chat, or just contact one of us.
And Cindy Black had a question. Maybe she can just unmute herself. Hi, Cindy, and ask.
Sure. I just noticed there was only 7 co-sponsors in the 116th Congress on the bill, which seems really low. So do we know why, or is it just that people weren't pushing it enough? And then also too, do you know when the bill will be reintroduced in the 117th Congress?
I don't know exactly when it will be reintroduced. I know there have been a number of attempts, but things have derailed it, but delays on other pieces of legislation that we want to make sure get full hearing before we do the Fair Representation Act. It's not, of course, it's not in my control, but I think Don Beyer is just very sensitive to not competing with any of the other important discussions that are happening right now. And as to the number of members who've signed on, I think Don Beyer made a decision to not really pursue other sponsors terribly hard. I like to think that that's the reason. There wasn't really a national organization that was devoted specifically to getting more sponsors, but that's definitely different now. Fair Vote is being very intentional about building constituencies around the bill to add sponsors, if not lead sponsors. And my organization, Represent Women, is trying to do the same. So we hope it will be a different story in the 117th Congress.
And one more follow-up, are there any states that are trying to do this on a state level? Like a fair representation?
Well, yes, there's
states?
been lots of conversations, as you know, Washington State is talking about it. There are people, activists in Illinois who want to do it. There are people, I'd say there's there are pockets of conversation all over the country. There's a great active Florida group, I love them. But I think the getting legislation introduced with multiple sponsors is really the challenge, I think, at this point. But I think, to your point, Cindy, that's a great place to start. And the city level also. I know this form of voting is a remedy in several Voting Rights Act cases where a judge is saying, look, you've got to do something about your winner-take-all voting system because it's discriminatory, and communities are coming together to choose this as an option. And we see that as a very, obviously important for representation, but also important to ground that conversation in evidence to see how well it's working in some jurisdictions around the country.
Thank you.
Michigan, yes.
Yes, well, we actually are talking about the federal level tonight or today. We absolutely know and support local implementation wherever possible, because that when people are using it, that is really going to be our best bet for moving it forward. So I'll say again, if any of you want to be in on these discussions on how to approach national, how to strategize so that we are able to contact our representatives and ask for co-sponsors, please let Barbara or I know. And thank you all for being here. And thank you to Cynthia and Michelle. Michelle, your comments really made me feel heartened when you were going there about all the possibilities for the future locally. It really felt good to hear from you, and you too, Cynthia. Great to see you. So thank you all for coming.
And have a good
Thank
weekend.
you again.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Night.
Bye.
Right.
Norman. On the last minute.
Okay, thanks, Paula and Barbara.
Have a good night.
Cindy, did
Oh.
you want to stay? Cynthia, did you want to stay for a second? Or were you talking about it another time?
Let's do it another time.
Okay.
Okay.
Can I ask a question that I only got finished right as you were saying the end?
Yeah, sure.
As I was reading the Fair Representation Act text, because I've been working a lot with my brother about redistricting commissions, and he's actually doing some revisions to the S1 of the HR 1 S1 on redistricting commissions because it's a mess. Amy Klobuchar has a redistricting commission bill that just deals with having independent redistricting commissions. It's much simpler than the one that the 4,000, the FRA from the 116th. And I always get nervous about omnibus type, and it's not omnibus, but lump bills that put so much specific information, and especially when you're talking federal, there's no flexibility. I mean, it's a very detailed description of a redistricting commission that's just unworkable. There's no chance at all that it will pass as is. So what about, separating out ranked choice voting from multi-member districts, from redistricting commissions, and really working those bills to make them flexible enough that they could be applied across all states?
Yeah, that's a good point. There will probably be a ranked choice voting act. Jamie Raskin introduced it in the 116th. I suspect he'll introduce it again. The problem with introducing just a multi-winner bill is that the consequences of multi-winner districts in a winner-take-all system would be disastrous for people of color. So it would be returned to the legacy of the South. And
well, it would be tied. Yeah, I mean, a multi-member district would be tied to ranked choice voting, but
Yes,
you could do ranked choice voting without.
yes, for sure.
Yeah.
It's a really good question. I know that there been lots of conversations among lots of smart people about what the best strategy is. And I think there is a need to have an entity that helps to define the districts in the states that are going to have multiple districts. So without specifying that, I don't know how easy it would be to sell, but but it's a good question. And I'm obviously not an authority on that at all. As Michelle was saying about packaging things, I think there is a precedent for things being packaged together being more likely to pass, at least at the local level. Like in my community, we passed, same-day registration and formerly incarcerated people being able to vote. And
Right, sure. Yeah.
all at the same time. People
Yeah, yeah.
So I think there's some
At the statewide level, I can see that, but in the federal level, that much prescription just seems like an impossible dream.
Well, I mean, I would say similar things are the For the People Act is a similar kind of multi-facet bill. And I think I would say that it's important to do both. So I think a both and strategy is helpful, because one, you need to be looking holistically, and there's a conversation that you can have about like how these all work together and why we want them. And then individually, you can also say like, you have Senator Klobuchar's bill, and you can be, and if it has very similar components, then it might be how we kind of are able to move certain parts forward earlier than others. But I think there's always strategies in organizing itself that like you don't give up like your power before you've even had a chance to try to use it. And so our opportunity is to say, this is the vision and this is what we want, and these are the things that we need to make our democracy work better. And then we can work back from there about what we want to do right now versus what we are going to do later. But I think if we just said like, let's just do this, what often happens and what we've seen so far is that they do that and they're like, well, we did it, so we're fine. Like, we passed the Civil Rights Act. Why do we have to do something again and look at it? Why does this matter? That's like, that is the thinking with some legislators. And so that's why it's really important to be like, this is our real vision.
Mm-hmm.
If we need to talk about different ways to get there, I'm fine with having that conversation, but let's not like take that away as a tool to move it forward.
Yeah, I agree. Well,
she's a strategist.
It's good to have it all out there. It's good to have it all out there to chew on. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you. I'm sorry that I didn't get that out there sooner.
No.
Oh, that was.
It's
It
too
was
bad
good
other
to have
people
that
didn't hear it, Marcia, but yeah.
Bye.
Good deal.
Bye, Marcia. I hope your dinner was good. So
It was pretty good. Yeah, fish tacos, man. Thanks. Have a good night.
Good night,
It's good
everyone.
to see you again. Okay, bye, everybody.
bye. Thank you again.
Thanks.
Thanks, Michelle and Cynthia.
Sure.
Really-
I hope that was what you had in mind.
That was great.
Cool. All right, I'm heading out. Bye.
Good night.